"Please don't take my child away," cried the widow as the crowd looked on. I never thought my shame would be dragged into the open like cattle for slaughter. The market square and Dustridge roared that morning, hooves clattering, men shouting over the price of beef, the stink of sweat and dust mixing in the air. I clutched Emily's small hand, her curls tied back with the same blue ribbon I'd worn as a girl, and told myself we'd be invisible in the chaos. But Crowley found me anyway. Bart Crowley leaned on his cane like a king on a throne, eyes slick as oil, voice loud enough to hush a dozen traitors. He spoke my husband's name like it was a curse. "Debt don't die with the man, Clara. It passes like land, like stock, like sickness." His words spilled into the crowd, and I swear every man there turned his back to me as though shame were contagious. I tried to reason, to beg. My husband was gone, buried beneath prairie sod, leaving me with nothing but a child in a shack that leaked when it rained. I had no herd, no land worth a dime, no gold tucked away. All I had was Emily. And Crowley, with a grin that soured my stomach, knew it. He tapped his cane once on the boards of the auction block. "Then the girl will do, payment in flesh, until the debt's seen square." Emily didn't understand, not at first. She clung to me, hiding her face in my skirt as the men laughed. A pair of Crowley's riders dismounted and closed in, boots grinding through dust. I shrieked, some sound raw and unholy that scraped my throat bloody, but no one moved. Not the preacher, not the sheriff, not even the women who knew the weight of an empty cupboard. Emily's little hand was pried from mine. She wailed, reaching back for me as though her fingers alone could keep us bound together. The crowd pressed in closer, their silence worse than jeers, their eyes fixed anywhere but my pain. I threw myself to the ground, clawing through dirt, skirts tearing, knees splitting open on gravel. I remembered the taste of dust in my mouth as I crawled, screaming her name, "Emily! My Emily!" The riders dragged her toward Crowley's wagon, her small shoes kicking against their shins. My hands stretched out, useless, like wings torn from a bird. I felt the whole town watching me on my knees, less than a beggar, less than human. I thought I would die there, with my child carried off like a goat to market, my shame etched into every soul who refused to help. But even in the roar of blood in my ears, I heard the sharp jangle of coins hitting wood. The sound split the moment, clean and final as a shot fired. I lifted my head, dirt streaking my face, and saw Crowley's grin falter. Gold glinted at his feet, scattered from a leather pouch tossed down like an insult. The market went silent, and for the first time every gaze shifted, not to me, not to Emily, but to the man who'd stepped forward.
The sound of those coins cut through the market louder than any pistol shot. Men turned from their cattle, women from their baskets of flour, children stopped their play. All eyes fell on the stranger who'd thrown his gold at Crowley's boots. He was tall, shoulders wide, face weathered like cedar left in sun. His hat brim shadowed most of him, but there was something in his stance, rooted, unshakable, that made the riders hesitate with Emily still wriggling in their grip. He didn't say a word, not one. Crowley's cane tapped once. "You mean to buy what's mine?" His voice was mocking, but I saw his hand tremble, just enough for the cane's tip to leave a tiny hollow in the dirt. The stranger didn't answer. He just stepped closer, boots crunching slow, deliberate. Dust curled around his heels like smoke. He untied a second pouch from his belt, heavier, and let it fall. The clink of coin on coin hushed the last to the laughter. Emily's sobs broke through the silence. She reached for me, and I crawled forward again, but the stranger moved quicker. He slid between her and Crowley's men, blocking her with the broad line of his body. His arm, hard as oak, stretched back, guiding Emily behind him. She clutched at his coat like it was the only thing keeping her from drowning. The whole square held its breath. Crowley bent down, greedy fingers digging through the gold. He squinted, weighing each coin with his thumb. Then he spat into the dirt. Blood money spins same as any other. Debt's settled. His voice faltered, but his pride made him hold it steady. He waved his men back. They released Emily, and she ran straight into my arms. I crushed her to my chest, shaking, her tears soaking into my blouse. I wanted to thank the man, to ask who he was, but when I lifted my eyes, his gaze was already elsewhere, fixed on Crowley with a silence sharp as steel. Crowley sneered, though his face had gone pale. "You'll regret crossing me, rancher." The man finally looked my way, just one glance, steady and sure, before he tipped his hat. Not a word passed his lips. Then he turned, guiding me and Emily through the parted crowd. We walked out of that square in stunned quiet, the dust still thick, my daughter clinging to my skirt. Every step felt like borrowed grace, bought by a stranger who spoke with gold instead of breath. But even as relief loosened my knees, fear gnawed me still. For no man spends that kind of coin without reason, and I had no idea what price might yet come due.
The stranger led us beyond the edge of town, down a dirt road that unwound like a ribbon into the hills. Emily fell asleep in my arms before long, her little fists still clutching the folds of my dress as though she feared being torn away again. I followed him in silence, my heart beating louder than our boots. At last we came to his place, a ranch house weathered gray, boards cracked and sun-bleached, a barn sagging at the ribs. The land stretched wide but wild, fences broken, weeds sprouting through the corrals. It wasn't wealth that carried him, it was something else, something heavier than gold. He opened the door without a word, letting us inside. The house smelled of leather, dust, and wood smoke. It wasn't barren, but it felt empty, like someone had swept clean of life and left only the bones. He pointed to a room down the hall, rough bed already made with quilt and pillow. I hesitated, suspicion gnawing at me. No man hands over shelter without wanting something in return. I braced for the demand, for his claim, his price, but it never came. He only nodded once, as if to say, "It's yours now," then turned to tend the fire. That night, Emily curled against me in the quilt, whispering, "Mama, are we safe?" I told her yes, though the word felt like a stranger on my tongue. Through the cracked door, I watched him sit by the hearth alone, head bent, silent as stone. Days passed, and I found his silence wasn't cruelty. It was restraint. He moved with a patience I couldn't name, fixing the porch rail, hauling water, leaving soap by the basin when he saw I had none. He never asked, never told. I began sweeping floors, cooking what little beans and bread I could manage. He didn't stop me. At supper, he'd sit across the table, hands folded, waiting until Emily's giggles filled the air before letting the faintest smile cross his lips. Still, I wondered, what weight did silence hide? What wound had sealed his tongue so tightly? Yet as the evening stretched, I found the fear inside me softening. giving way to a strange, cautious trust. The town had turned their faces from me, but this man, this quiet, unknown rancher, had opened his door. And though no words passed between us, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Because silence, I was learning, can hold more promise than 1,000 speeches.
The days began to fall into rhythm, as if the ranch itself was teaching us how to breathe again. Morning brought the cry of roosters and the creak of the pump, afternoons filled with chores and the clang of tin pans, nights stitched together by the steady hum of crickets outside the window. Jack, that was the name I finally pulled from a neighbor's lips when I went into town for flour, moved like a man stitched into silence. He never wasted motion, never raised his voice. If I dropped a pail, he'd simply stoop, lift it, and set it back without judgment. If Emily stumbled in the yard, he'd pick her up with hands calloused but careful, setting her back on her feet like a colt learning its legs. It was Emily who broke the wall first. One afternoon, while I kneaded dough at the table, I heard her laugh burst like sunlight. I rushed out, fearing some mischief, only to see Jack's black horse standing still in the corral, its mane crowned with wildflowers. Emily, grinning ear to ear, had twined the stems into a makeshift halo and patted the horse's nose as if she'd tamed a king. Jack didn't scold, didn't even move to stop her. He just stood there, head bowed, a shadow of something softer tugging at the corners of his mouth. When Emily shouted, "Uncle Jack, look, he's an angel horse," he turned away quick, but not before I caught the shine of damp in his eyes. After that, small kindnesses multiplied. A child's saddle appeared in the barn, rough but sturdy, sized just right for Emily. Warm meals began showing up on the table, better cuts of meat, corn roasted in the coals, a pie once that made Emily clap her hands in delight. And for me, bars of soap wrapped in cloth left by the wash basin like gifts from a ghost. I told myself not to read into it, not to let my guard soften. But at night, when Emily slept, I found my gaze drifting across the table, catching the glimmer of lamplight on his face. His silence was no longer a wall. It was a place where I could rest. One evening, Emily curled up between us after supper, eyes heavy, and whispered, "We're a family now." The words hit me like a blow. My breath caught, my heart stumbling as I searched Jack's face. His jaw tightened, his eyes dropped to the table. Yet he didn't move away. He stayed there, letting her lean against him, letting me feel for the first time in years that maybe the word wasn't as impossible as I thought. But just as I began to believe in this fragile peace, a shadow stirred at the edge of the hills, and I knew peace never lasts long in Wyoming.
It was the smell that woke me first, sharp, acrid, unnatural. Then Emily's scream cut through the night. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and saw the orange glow spilling through the window slats. The barn was burning. I stumbled onto the porch, pulling Emily close, and the sight near buckled my knees. Flames clawed skyward, devouring the dry timbers, sparks rising like fireflies. The cattle bellowed, horses shrieked against their stalls, the air thick with smoke that stung my eyes raw. And there, on the ridge, stood Bart Crowley. His cane caught the firelight, a twisted grin on his face as the barn collapsed inward. He'd come not for payment now, but for ruin. Jack didn't hesitate. Shirtless, boots half-laced, he sprinted straight into the inferno. I screamed his name, but he vanished into the choking dark, the door swallowing him whole. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd lost him too. Then came the sound of boards breaking, of hooves striking. One by one, animals staggered out. Calves stumbling blind, a horse with its mane singed, sheep scattering in terror. Through the smoke, Jack emerged, a calf clutched in his arms, soot streaking his face, sweat shining like oil on his skin. His chest heaved, his eyes burning brighter than the fire behind him. He went back again, and again. Each time I thought it would be his last, that the flames would claim him, but each time he dragged something living free. When the roof finally groaned and fell, he was hurled into the dirt, coughing, his body racked with spasms. I fell beside him, cradle in his head, tears streaking down my face, mixing with ash. Emily sobbed at his side, clinging to his hand as if she could keep him tethered to us. When his eyes finally fluttered open, I couldn't hold it back. I pressed my lips to his soot-stained forehead, whispering, "We stand together now. Whatever comes, we stand." Crowley was gone by then, vanished back into the dark, leaving only the echo of his malice and the ruin he'd sown. But I knew this much: he hadn't broken us. He'd bound us tighter. Because in the ashes, I no longer saw a stranger who'd saved us once. I saw the man who'd staked his life against the blaze, the man I could not let go. And I knew Bart Crowley would be back.
The barn lay in ruins, its charred beams jutting skyward like the ribs of some great carcass. For days, neighbors came with buckets and hammers, offering what little help they could, but most of the work fell on Jack's shoulders. Even half-healed from smoke and burns, he moved steadily, his silence a wall no man could breach. Evenings, we sat on the porch, the prairie stretching dark around us, cicadas buzzing like a hymn. Emily would curl on the step with her doll, while I watched Jack's profile in the lantern glow. He looked older in that light, more tired, but also gentler, as though the fire had stripped away a layer of armor I hadn't noticed before. It was Emily who cracked him. Children have a way of asking the one question grown folks spend their lives avoiding. That night she shuffled closer to him, her small hand slipping into his rough one. "Can people choose their fathers?" she asked, voice small but sure. The world seemed to hold its breath. I froze, my heart leaping to my throat. Jack's body stiffened, his hand tightening just a fraction around hers. He didn't answer, not at first. His jaw worked, eyes fixed on the horizon as though he could outrun the words. Emily, stubborn as any child, pressed again. "'Cause if they can, I choose you." The silence that followed was heavier than gunpowder. My pulse roared in my ears, shame and hope colliding inside me. I wanted to hush her, to save him from the weight of it, but I couldn't speak. My throat was locked tight. Then, slowly, Jack turned his head. His eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd known him, the silence wavered. He swallowed hard, then bent, lifting Emily into his lap. He didn't speak, not a word, but he held her, arms wrapping her small body, and gave a single, steady nod. Emily grinned, tucking herself against his chest. "Then you're my pa now," she whispered, as if sealing a promise. I couldn't stop the tears that slid down my face. Jack kept his gaze at me, unflinching, letting me see all the weight behind that one nod. From that night on, the house felt different. His silence was no longer empty. It was full of a bond that no man's fire, no creditor's claim could sever. But bonds, once forged, must be defended, and Bart Crowley was not finished with us yet.
It came at dusk, when the sky was split between dying gold and the first wash of night. I was setting supper when the dogs barked wild,
and the rumble of hooves rolled across the prairie. I stepped onto the porch, my blood running cold at the sight of torches cresting the hill. Crowley rode at their head, cane glinting, flanked by 6 men with rifles slung across their backs. Their horses churned the dirt, throwing sparks of light from the torches. Emily clung to my skirts, wide-eyed, while Jack stepped past us, rifle in hand, planting himself in the yard like an oak grown overnight. "Clara!" Crowley's voice carried, slick with false authority. "You and the girl belong to me by law of debt. No man can buy what's rightfully owed." The riders fanned out, their torches licking orange against the night. Fear clawed at me, but Jack didn't move. He just stared, shoulders squared, the weight of silence pressing down on all of us. Crowley sneered. "You gonna hide behind your mutinous rancher, or you gonna let what's mine walk free?" And then, like a cannon shot in the hush, Jack's voice broke the air, rough, ragged, but louder than thunder. "They're not yours. They're my family." The words cracked something open in me. Tears blurred my sight as Emily buried her face against my legs. Jack's chest heaved, his rifle steady in his hands, and for the first time I understood. The silence was not weakness, it was choice. He spoke only when it mattered. Crowley's smirk faltered, his cane shaken. "You'll hang for this, rancher!" But just then, lanterns winked alive along the road. Men and women from town, neighbors who'd once turned their backs, now rode forward with rifles of their own. One by one, they dismounted, standing shoulder to shoulder in Jack's yard. The preacher, the blacksmith, even the sheriff who'd stayed quiet that day in the market. Their faces were hard, their silence an answer Crowley couldn't twist. Jack didn't lower his rifle, neither did they. The torchlight flickered across a standoff thick enough to choke on. Crowley snarled, jerking his reins. "This ain't over." But I saw the truth in his eyes, his grip slipping, his power cracking. With a spit into the dust, he wheeled his horse and thundered back into the dark, his riders trailing like shadows swallowed by night. When the last hoofbeat faded, my knees gave way. I clutched Emily close, sobbing into her hair. Jack dropped his rifle, and when I looked up at him, I saw blood seeping down his arm, soaking his sleeve. He swayed, but he did not fall. And in that moment, I knew Bart Crowley might come again with fire or law, but it would never be enough, because Jack had already claimed us with the only words that mattered.
The neighbors stayed through the night, tending Jack's wound, shoring up the fences, stamping out the last of the torch fires left smoldering in the grass. By dawn, the yard looked less like a battlefield and more like a gathering place, where hands that once turned away now built alongside us. Crowley had been driven off, his grip broken. The law he clung to had no hold here anymore. Jack lay in bed, his arm bound tight, sweat cooling on his brow. Emily perched on the mattress beside him, her tiny hand curled around his thick wrist as though she were the one keeping him alive. When his eyes fluttered open, she leaned close and whispered, "Pa." He smiled, a real smile, not just the flicker I had seen at the edges of his silence, but a light that filled his whole face, and my heart, weary as it was, lifted with it. Later, when the house quieted, I sat by his side and asked the question I'd held back since the day he'd saved us. "Why, Jack? Why risk all this for me and a child that ain't yours?" He didn't answer first, just reached into the drawer by the bed and pulled out something small, worn soft with years, a ribbon.
faded blue, frayed at the ends. My breath caught. It was the very ribbon I'd tied in my hair the day we met, when I'd been too lost in debt and shame to notice anyone watching. He'd kept it all this time. He placed it in my palm, his rough fingers closing mine around it. Then he looked at me, steady, unblinking, and though he spoke no word, I understood. Every deed, every risk, every coin, every silence had been his vow. This was his voice. I leaned down, tears blurring my sight, and kissed him, not out of gratitude, but because I knew finally that love doesn't always come in speeches or promises. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the steadfastness of a man who speaks only when it matters. And in that silence, we found a language all our own.